Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. On March the 21st, the world commemorated World Down Syndrome Day. Joining me to talk about this is Mark Bradford, appointed fellow for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities at the beginning of 2023. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
It's a pleasure. I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm very, very well, thank you. Now, I want to invite you to first speak about Hearts of Joy that Lauren Constabile founded and the work that Hearts of Joy does.
Yes. I've known Lauren for several years. We saw one another in person last about 2 or 3 years ago, I think, at the United Nations in New York, where we were both speaking at a World Down Syndrome Day event. Lauren made a trip to Uganda once and came across some individuals with Down syndrome and just really realized the need in that culture for a greater awareness of what the condition was, because many people in that culture really didn't even know what the diagnosis was for their child. And also being aware of the heart conditions. Many children born with Down syndrome have cardiac defects that need to be remedied surgically, or their chance of life is severely compromised and many will die. So Lauren came home and decided that she would found this organization called Hearts for Joy that would provide surgeries for children, first in Uganda, and then she expanded to India and to the Philippines. She would provide surgeries for them that would repair these cardiac defects and give them an opportunity to live. So she's transformed so many lives. At this point, I think she offers surgeries to children in Uganda, in the Philippines, and in India. The surgeries, for the most part, I think, are done in India, where the prices are much more manageable than they would be in the United States. So she raises money to provide these surgeries to young children and manages to get all of the family of the child to India with them, where the hospital is that she uses. She does all that for $10,000 a child, which is astounding to me. In the United States, with our healthcare prices, that would be impossible to do. But she's saving lives. Just because she wanted to do something for children and families in the developing world, or what we call low-income world these days, I guess, where children otherwise would die and where their lives were little understood and often rejected and just kept at home and hidden away. Phenomenal work.
It truly is, and I'm very glad that you bring light to it, because even in your own work, the plight and cause of children born with disabilities, in this case particularly Down syndrome, is one that you're finding people need further education on. Please speak to that.
Yes. Yeah, I wrote an article for Word on Fire that was published just Sunday or Saturday? The 21st. That was Saturday, I think, for World Down Syndrome Day, where I introduced Lauren at the beginning of the article, and then I talked about how many of us in the United States and countries, high-income countries like ours, might look at countries like Uganda or India and look down on them because of the way they view Down syndrome. But really, the way we view Down syndrome in our country is we have a great deal of understanding about it. But in 74% of the cases where a baby is prenatally diagnosed with Down syndrome, 74% of the cases that prenatal diagnosis will lead to abortion of that child. It's higher in other countries. It's not quite as high as the United States and other countries as well. But here it's 74%. Researchers have shown that the population of individuals with Down syndrome in the United States is 36% less than it would be if there was no prenatal diagnosis in Down syndrome. So while we have a great deal of understanding, we have early intervention programs for children who are born with Down syndrome. Public schools are required by law to provide a free and appropriate public education for children who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. We have all kinds of understanding, but our scientific and medical understanding has led to a new eugenics movement that is really horrifying to observe, not only through prenatal diagnosis and abortion, but also with the growing use of IVF in the United States and the entire Western world at this point, where embryos that are screened, embryos that are diagnosed to have some sort of genetic anomaly are just eliminated and discarded and not even given a chance to live. So we're creating this a greater stigma, really, about having a child with an intellectual or developmental disability like Down syndrome, just because of our scientific, our medical knowledge and the advancements that we've had that allow us to, unfortunately, allow us to engender life in petri dishes in scientific medical labs, or to prenatally diagnose a child with tests now as early as 10 or 12 weeks. So we have a long ways to go to find the sort of acceptance that we would like to see and the welcoming that we would like to see for children with Down syndrome in our communities.
This year, the theme of World Down Syndrome Day was Together Against Loneliness.
Yes.
One of the things that research has highlighted is the families, but also the individuals that struggle with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They experience more loneliness than the average person. Share with us their plight.
Yes. Well, it's true. Children with, everyone, not just children, with intellectual and developmental disabilities experience loneliness maybe 7 times more than people in the general population do. So, loneliness has horrific effects on individuals. It's the cause of depression, of anxiety disorders, various other mental health conditions that are manifested at much more higher numbers in the community of individuals with developmental disabilities also than in the general population. And largely because of this factor, because they're not generally accepted. Most people will tell you who have a developmental or intellectual disability will tell you that they really have no friends, that everyone around them is obligated to be. They have their families, and then they have caretakers that are paid perhaps to take care of them. But for them to find true friendships are really rare. So what that causes then is this phenomenon of loneliness that it affects anywhere between 40 and 50% of individuals with developmental disabilities at some point in their life. In the general population, that's a lower percentage, maybe around 15 to 20%, somewhere in that range. So it is a real problem, and I was glad to see that theme was raised this year on World Down Syndrome Day, trying to raise awareness of the importance of inclusion programs in schools. The Catholic Church is not doing a very good job at that, I'm afraid, in our Catholic schools. But inclusion programs are needed. Parishes should be a place of welcoming, and people with intellectual and developmental disabilities should be welcomed into our parishes and engaged in the evangelical mission of the parish. They're people just like the rest of us with gifts that God has given to them that are called to be used into the body of Christ. And we need to allow that opportunity for them.
In that sense then, Mark, would it be right to say that World Down Syndrome Day has more to do for the people who don't have exposure to people with intellectual disabilities rather than for those people themselves?
That's exactly true. And I think that's originally the reason that World Down Syndrome Day was established back in the early 2000s, recognized by the United Nations, I think, and on their calendar each year since 2012. But it was a movement that really began sooner, and it was to raise awareness of individuals with Down syndrome and what they can communicate to our communities.
Now, in light of all of this, though, you also draw from the wisdom of Catholic social doctrine to remind Catholics that this is a very important subset of our community we can't overlook.
Right. Yeah, the U.S. bishops wrote a pastoral statement in 1978 on persons with disabilities. And they made an interesting point in that statement. They said that we should consider caring for the needs of individuals with disabilities as a part of our pro-life advocacy in the church. And in that context, they mentioned obviously advocating for life from conception to natural death, but also providing for education, for employment, for housing, for all the needs of individuals with disabilities where they really suffer a lack of in most cases. And the areas of interest that they identified there all lined up with what Catholic social teaching tells us about what integral human development is. And that's That's the idea that every individual should be provided the opportunity to develop to the to the greatest extent possible, and all of that is related to one of the four core principles of Catholic social teaching that we call the common good. That encompasses everyone and really responds to Jesus' command that we love our neighbor as ourselves. And if we do that, we're always working toward the common good, because our first interest is for the people around us, the people in our immediate circle of family, obviously, but in our parishes and our broader community, and provide for the needs of all of those people before we consider the needs for ourselves. And you can imagine what kind of world it would be if we would ever manage to fulfill that command of Jesus. Certainly to love the Lord our God with all our hearts, all our soul, and all our being. But then the second commandment, like it, to love our neighbor as ourselves, that Jesus really stressed and gave us striking examples of toward the end of Matthew 25, for example, when Jesus talked about feeding the hungry and clothing the naked, etc. And he was asked, well, Lord, when did we do those things? And he said, well, as much as you have done them to these, my brothers and sisters, you've done them for me. And then he flipped that around and said, if you have not done those things, when did we not do these things? And he said, as much as you did not do these things for my brothers and sisters, you have not done them for me. With that great warning at the end of Matthew 25 and parables like the rich man and Lazarus, we need to pay greater attention to what Catholic social teaching teaches us about the common good.
Mark, you're a man after my own heart. I'm very grateful to have had this conversation with you. Thank you. Mark Bradford was appointed Fellow for Persons with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. We've been talking about his article on World Down Syndrome Day. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.